And good morning, everyone. It seems to have been a while since I've been on air, and a lot's happened, like an election and a trip to Stewart Island for me, where I got to see some spectacular scenery, had some good meetings, and also saw some of the biggest cock-ups I've seen for some time, which we'll talk about later on. But one of the good things that did come out of the election on the weekend was, or not this weekend, was it? We're 2 weekends away now, was Mark Patterson, New Zealand First candidate. Now, before Mark comes on air, I just want to say, or I suppose I have to declare a bit of an interest. My partner is the president for Federated Farmers in the Wairarapa, and he always talks about Mark Patterson as one of the most decent buggers he's ever had anything to do with, and a very level-headed man who is much appreciated and well respected by the Federated Farmers community. So he'll be a bit of a loss to them now that he's going back into he probably is going back into the roundhouse, I suspect, but definitely into Parliament. So good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Tina. It sounds like I owe David a beer.
Well, I suppose it does highlight some of the challenges that organisations like Federated Farmers have when you have quite a diversity of opinion. And I think that's always been the challenge, especially when you've been dealing with things like Heiwaki Kanoa. And so he's always appreciated those around the table who are willing to listen as much as speak. And he puts you fairly in that category, and a person who has a measurable amount of common sense.
Oh, well, it's very kind of him to say that. I must say the feeling's quite neutral. David's a fine contributor, a sound contributor to the Fed's cause. Yeah,
and that's it, Mike. You will be leaving it behind. So Federated, do you come right off Federated Farmers? Is it'd be too much of a conflict?
Yeah, well, I stood down as the president of Otago Federated Farmers in May because there was a conflict of interest in that. I'm still on the executive, but I guess I'll have to formally resign from that now, but we haven't quite got down to that level of detail. But yes, I've been at arm's length with them for a while now.
Yeah. So, and you're a farmer, and I know that you talk to Michael quite a lot, but just from my perspective, and there's probably a bit of a different audience with me, so just that in terms of your farm, you're in South Otago or North Otago?
South Otago. We sheep and beef farmers in Lawrence, just near Lawrence.
Oh, yep, pretty big place.
Southwest Otago, so it's on the way between kind of Dunedin and Queenstown, just on the South Otago part, just near the border with Central Otago, I guess.
Yes, a very, very pretty little town. I've been there a number of times over the years. So, Mark...
Yeah, it's quite historic too, Gabriel's Gully, where gold was discovered in 1861, so it has actually had a fair impact on certainly early New Zealand history. It was a pretty significant place. Yeah,
and they've retained quite a few of their older historic buildings, if I remember right, unless they've been damaged by earthquakes or had to be fixed by with earthquake strengthening.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So, Mark, New Zealand First came back this time round. Some people were surprised, some people weren't. And we are now sitting in that sort of period till I think it's the 2nd November as to what the government will look like. But in terms of your background, what do you think you can offer the country, whether you sit in the crossbenches, whether you're in the coalition or however it works? How have you operated in the past with Labour, and what do you think your strengths are going to be coming into this new reign?
Well, I think it's very much having an on-the-ground farmer perspective, sort of overlaid, as you inferred, with a stint with Feds in between a parliamentary term between 2017 and 2020. So I've got that kind of a little bit of parliamentary experience. I can hit the ground running probably a bit quicker than some of the new farmer MPs coming in. But also having been in and then out again, I've seen what the quite wide-ranging reform process of the last Parliament particularly looks like on the ground. So I think I've got a pretty good overview of what's happening and maybe what needs to be done.
Yeah. So what were the highlights and the lowlights of working with Labour?
Well, obviously we got, we had quite a lot of leverage in those negotiations. So we got a lot of our policy platform, and I think particularly for us, the Provincial Growth Fund, we see it out there now, up and running all around the country, various projects, enabled the biggest mussel farm in the world, and in Apotiki, the flood bank restoration saved Taradale in the
You're obviously a man outstanding in your field, Mark.
So we think, whilst that did get a bit of flack at the time, I think now those projects are out and working, and the public can see them and possibly realise that it was something that we won during those coalition negotiations, that I think history will judge those projects well.
Yeah. And I've been a recipient of one of those grants for a project on Stewart Island. But I think the thing for me is, and having worked with some of the government departments on around that fund, is there is a huge difference in the degree of expertise and the people that you get to work with. And I think from our perspective, we've probably had 10 or 15 people over the course of 3 years working with us to get to fruition. And from your perspective, are you comfortable with where government departments are at around their efficiency? And the reason I ask that is there's the Ombudsman, I think it's the Auditor General, has just come out with a statement talking about the fact that he is unable to say how efficient government departments are. He just doesn't see any clarity. So there's lots of money going out or in, but very little evidence of exactly how efficient they are. And having talked to Shane in the past about this, it strikes me as, yes, there were some really good projects with the PGF, but the system itself often didn't help. So I just wondered what your experience was looking at some of those projects and the level of expertise within the government departments to deliver on what you wanted.
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I mean, I think more broadly, there's got to be massive question marks over the public service and the amount of money that is getting pumped into, or the increase in government spending getting pumped in, and the lack of outcomes out the other end. And I think the classic one's the mental health funding, which seems to have disappeared into a black hole, and it was something we were quite proud of at the time.
Yeah.
Being part of that funding increase, and so there's definitely a case for root and branch overhaul of how some of those public sector systems operate. In regard, and actually I think the lack of delivery was a core reason for the change of government. I think the public just lost any confidence that when announcements were made, they were actually going to end up with an outcome at the other end. In relation to the PGF, I know Shane pushed that really hard. He had to, he used to describe it as wading through treacle, because he was up against a bureaucracy that wasn't used to moving at speed. Our view very much was that it was a political win for us in those coalition negotiations, and we had a mandate to get some action and activity, and Shane did a good job against those odds in deploying the funding. And I think given that, there's been remarkably little. I think it's been relatively well received in terms of on the ground. There was always going to be a few road bumps where one or two projects didn't live up to expectations, but I think for the most part they have, and it's actually been a good example of how a strong minister can get action. I think that'll be a bit of a template I think we can look to within the next Parliament.